wouldn't make any difference.
So that's a threat to the empire. So I don't know if the first part, he'd accepted the claim or responsibility for being king of the Jews, and then so that's a threat to the empire, and they're got to squash that, and they're military. So
Okay. The other question I had was, it does seem like there's a special cruelty here with the crown of thorns, the scourging, the beating. Again, I don't have any answers here. It could be a threat. It could be, though, that Pilate's like, you're the king of the Jews, that's your problem. But what was it that we also read about earlier that was beginning to happen around toward the end of the last trial? It's in verse 24, 27, 24. I heard it. Riot? I think I heard it. Yes, a riot. A riot, tumult is what it says in mine. So yeah, again, the Romans were in charge of the city, so therefore you wanted to make sure that you don't let anything get out of hand, so that your name doesn't become bad back to Caesar. What about the multitudes on the road? Do we have any insight into what they were feeling here? I gave it away, if you were watching the screen. So there was actually a lot of compassion and weeping. We don't see that in the Matthew account. We see it in the Luke account. But in Luke 23, 26 through 31, which I do want to take a moment to go over and read, 23, 26. Now, as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. And a great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. And then Jesus turns to them and says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry?" The phrase I want to focus in on is verse 27. A great multitude of people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. Is this the same multitude that also condemned him back in the courtyard of Pilate? Or is it a different multitude? Go ahead. Oh. Go ahead, Daniel.
I was going to say, it's always hard for me to know a little bit because you have, the triumphal entry just 6 days ago, where the multitudes were praising him as the Son of David. Then you have the crowds, that are shouting, "Crucify him." And then you have these crowds that are mourning him. So are these all the same people? Are they different groups of people that feel differently about Jesus? The outer town crowd that was more sympathetic at the triumphal entry, the in-town crowd that's more hostile, when he's, put on trial. But it's a little hard to figure out where all these reactions are coming from.
Thank you. So the other thing that I wanted to point out there in Luke is that it appears Jesus is pointing ahead. It's almost the same exact language that we read in Matthew 20, is it 5? Help me, Daniel. It was in your section, 24, where we read about, Matthew 24, where we're reading about the destruction of Jerusalem. Give me the sign of the end of the times. That section is very, very similar language to that. Okay, why did it happen? These are, again, my thoughts. It's really God's will, manifest and foretold. And we're going to get into a little bit of this in a few slides here, but it's to fulfill prophecy. God foretold that this would happen. It's to show that Jesus was just like any other man in being able to be hurt, being able to be represented and to die like a man would. It's to show Jesus' great love for mankind, and the fact that he could have destroyed and broken free, but yet he submitted. And then finally, to make peace with God, the ultimate Passover lamb. Again, Matthew 27 is so rich in detail. We could spend a month in here, but we're not going to be able to do that. Okay, so now we've made it to the cross. Let's go ahead and read on the cross, and then we will continue to go through this section, and then we've got one more section at the end around the burial. Matthew 27, verse 35. Then they crucified him and divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they kept watch over him there, and they put up over his head the accusation written against him, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and another on the left. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroy the temple and build it up in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, "He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God." Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. Now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of those who stood there, when they heard that, said, "This man is calling for Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, "Let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So when the centurion had those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, "Truly this was the Son of God." And many women who followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, were there looking on from afar. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Okay, so how does Jesus maintain his focus on spiritual matters? And again, thinking about all the prophecies, everything is fulfilled to a T. So some of the highlights here, he is crucified, placed on the cross is lifted up, put in the ground. But remember, about 3 p.m., darkness fell over the land. So just imagine the middle of the day and darkness. Maybe they had seen eclipses before, but how long does an eclipse last? It gradually gets darker and then it starts getting lighter within an hour or so. This was 3 hours of darkness. And then Jesus dies, cries out, "It is finished." And then there's some miracles that happen here. And what I want to focus on during this section is on the cross and those nearby. What do we see? What kind of state was Jesus in? And I have a long list here. So in interest of time, let me go ahead and click through these and then we can discuss them. Again, my perspective, tell me if I need to see it differently. He was sleep deprived. It's been 36 hours since Thursday morning until this time that he's been awake. We see that in 26 and 67, he's been slapped. He's been beaten, bruised, bloodied from the scourging, head bleeding from the crown of thorns. He was spat upon, headache. My words, he was hit in the head. Give me a headache. In verse 30, friends forsook him, let him down, Peter. God forsook him, his own words. Lied about, robbed of his possessions, the garments were taken. He was stripped, put a robe on. Basically, human dignity was taken. He was mocked, berated, thirsty, hungry, and then the ultimate, he was crucified. So, are there any obvious areas that we just read through that I didn't get up there in that list? And please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. The other thing to think about here is, it's not like this just happened, right? We just read through that in, 2 minutes, and that was 3 hours or 4 hours. This is happening over a period of time, and I can just see it. They'll beat him, and then they'll take a break, and then they'll come back and beat him some more. So this is continuous torture, basically, at this point. The other thing is that the women who ministered to him that we read about in verse 55, they were not able to minister to him during this time at all. It's not like he got to phone a lawyer and have a friend come in and take care of him and bring him food, bring him anything. He was basically separated and kept away from all of his friends and followers at this point. Taylor? Yeah, one of the purposes of it being offered and being refused was it was prophesied, so that was fulfilled. But again, I think I kind of are right there with you. Was it meant as a kind of a dampening agent, a pain agent, to take away some of the pain that he was through? I think the sour wine was simply a byproduct of, we're not going to give anything that's nice to, a condemned man. So, Daniel, go ahead.
I'm no expert. I was just thinking that in verse 34, what they offer him has gall mixed in, which, again, I don't know what that means, but that's different than later on when he's just given sour wine to drink. So I don't know if that, whatever they added to it, that gall factor is the kind of either numbs the pain or is a poison of some sort that would kind of, move things along quicker. I'm assuming that's the difference between those two offerings.
Jordan?
Asked about this the other day, that that phrase, maybe this helps the wine situation, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, says Jesus said this with a loud voice, which I think maybe you mentioned it, or maybe Daniel did in one of the classes we've been doing, but it's a reference to Psalm 22. And so the idea being, I think anyway, is that the bystanders that heard this, did they not know that specifically? Because you have to think, I think the bystanders here is probably the Jewish people. I mean, they asked about, hey, is he calling for Elijah? Maybe not the Romans would know who Elijah was and whatnot. So if that's true, if there's a disconnect there, they're not getting it even still, even when he says this in a loud voice, maybe that sheds some light on, running to get some sour wine. Was it was it an act of mercy, or was it taking another shot, so to speak? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, thank you, Jordan. Good call out there. The other thing that I noticed with the whole wine question is, it seems like he refused it both times. So it was offered, but in verse 48, they offered it to him to drink. The rest said, let him alone. So I guess we don't have enough information to know if he took it or not, but it's on a sponge. How much can you get? Jordan? Taylor?
Yeah, just where my mind was at when I asked that question was, you were asking about the necessity of the brutality. It seemed if the role of the wine were to act as a doling agent, then it seemed particularly important that Jesus experienced the full effects of the pain being put on him, right? So, yeah. Anyway, you could see how that would, at least from a standpoint of compelling someone, that the horrific nature of the act was significant, and therefore it would be more compelling than if it were a simple beheading or something like that, right? And I don't know if that's just kind of drawing on inferences, but anyway, that's kind of where I was thinking with the question.
No, thank you. Okay, Then the next part of this is the witnesses and the cloud of witnesses. I don't know if it was David Lanius. It was one of the preachers that that basically offered a 5 or 10 part series on here's a perspective from the cross. Was that you, Daniel? Did I misremember? Okay. So I think it's on our website. I just have to go find it. But the witnesses, and again, because I'm going to run out of time, I'm just going to go ahead and click these up. We've got Simon of Cyrene. He was compelled to bear the cross there. Did he immediately scatter and leave? Don't know, but it seems like he was there. Passers-by are mentioned. The multitude, in this case, I think it's a couple of different ones that we talked about. The chief priests, scribes, and elders are called out by group name. Disciples are there, or some of them at least. Some of the women, Mary Magdalene, mother of Zebedee's sons. There's got to be a connection back to her request of, can my sons be on your right and your left? No, they're not ready to bear this suffering. Or what was the exact quote, Daniel?
Drink the cup and be baptized with the baptized that I'll be baptized.
Are they ready? Are they willing? And this is the cup. The robbers were there, and again, we have a different account of that with more detail in a different gospel. The Roman soldiers were there. The centurion was there. The pilot was there. And then Joseph of Arimathea was also there because he comes and asks for the body after Jesus is dead. So the question would be for us is, did any of these witnesses, we know kind of where their head was as they came to the event and watched the death of the Christ, did their opinion change through here? There's a couple of obvious ones where it did. And then the question would be, we know where we are before we're saved. Does our opinion change after we really understand the sacrifice that was made for us? And then how about over time? So again, I'm going to completely run out of time. Yes, nope, you've raised your hand. You're going to be called on. Thank you.
The thing that's always struck me about this is Luke's account when it talks about those around the cross, and the ones who understood were not the disciples, but it was the thief on the cross, because he knew he was about to die. He knew Jesus was about to die, but he said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. It was something that the disciples apparently still didn't understand, but this thief on the cross did. Then the next one who understands it is the centurion.
Yep.
And all of these that have been the closest to him for some reason, and we know, I think we learned later that their vision was somewhat limited, and then it's opened up. I think it's in John, maybe into John, where it talks about that, but I may be off on that. But those two were the ones that really got it.
Yeah, two non-Jews, and seemingly on the outside, if you will, right? They weren't followers, so they were truly just there, and that's the beauty of it, right? Look at the facts. The facts are this. What other conclusion can you draw? This was the Son of God. Okay, miracles at the cross. So my first question is, what's a miracle? If we had more time, the basic definition that I'm going with here is an extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs. In other words, something that would not have happened normally in nature. What are some of the miracles seen at the time of Jesus' death? We actually had a homework question with, identify 8 of them. So I'm just going to list them through, starting verse 45, follow along with me. Darkness over the land from noon to 3. Verse 51, the temple veil was torn from top to bottom. And again, tall, right? So unless you got up on a ladder, it would have been bottom to top otherwise. Verse 51, earthquake. Verse 51, rock split. I don't know if those are one and the same or separate. Wasn't there. Verse 52, graves were opened. That seems to be different than verse 52, the dead were raised. I don't know if it's the first step or is that one and the same. It's okay. The dead were raised. There's probably a whole nother discussion we can have there, because then we talk about leaving the graves. And when does that happen? After the resurrection, right? I always imagined, oh, the dead were raised, they go into Jerusalem, and you're like, they were dead. That doesn't happen for 3 days, the time that Jesus is in the grave too. So their life comes to them when he is raised, resurrected. And then finally, verse 53, formerly dead entered Jerusalem and appeared to many. Again, are 6, 7, and 8 all one event? The graves are opened, the dead are raised, and then they go into Jerusalem. Up to you. I'm not going to debate that one. So what Old Testament event does this remind you of? What, based on the reactions of those at the cross? And this is a read my mind moment. It works really well in a small classroom. All right, I'll give it to you. To me, it took me back to God and Israel at Mount Sinai. What was their reaction in Exodus 20, 18, and 19? Their reaction was, we are afraid. We are abject fear. Moses, we don't ever want to hear God talk to us again. You be our mediator for us. To me, it's the same exact kind of eye-opening. And I think the centurion's response would be, this was the Son of God. And that was his response. So that's my conclusion. Okay, these are the prophecies, or at least Old Testament references back in Matthew 26 and Matthew 27. It's small print. It's there in the material on the website. And we're going to go ahead and read Psalm 22, 1 through 5, and then 14 through 18. And then we're going to read all of Isaiah 53. And then we're going to go through the burial, the last part of 27, and that'll be our class. Okay, Messianic prophecies, seen in Psalm 22, starting in verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. In you, our ancestors put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. Verse 14, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart was turned to wax. It was melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. 14 through 18 is really impressive to me, because you look at it and it's almost word for word. This happened to Jesus. And you have to imagine that those witnessing the events go back and find Psalm 22, and they're like, what have we just done? And we'll come back to that. Isaiah 52, verses 13 through 15. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. And then finally, Isaiah 53. Let me go ahead and turn to it. Isaiah 53, we'll read the whole chapter. Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted, but he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent. So he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong. Because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Again, some of these passages are self-explanatory. We've seen these and talked about them, but I think putting them together and reading them, Matthew 27, then going looking at what was said before is just makes it so obvious how they're connected. Okay, Matthew 27, 57 through 63. We'll finish up here and have 10 minutes, so maybe it's just right. Now when evening had come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given to him. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember, while he was still alive, how that deceiver said, After 3 days I will arise. Therefore, command that the tomb be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, He has risen from the dead. So the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, You have a guard. Go your way. Make it as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. Okay, there are quite a few items that pop up here. This is an example of what a tomb might look like. I'm not saying this is the one, but Jesus is buried. There are a couple of telling statements here, and the first telling statement is verse 63. Who's speaking in verse 63? The chief priests and the Pharisees, right? That's what we see in verse 62. Sir, we remember, while he was still alive. What are their words? While he was still alive. What are they saying? Jesus is dead, right? So I thought that was interesting. So the question is, dead or not dead? And this is what we're going to take a look at for the last few minutes here. So was Jesus a man? Yep, I heard yes. Yes. Did Jesus die? Was there any doubt that he died? What were the Jews trying to protect from in their statement in verse 63 and 64? Right. They were worried about a deception, a lie, a falsehood that would be spread that, hey, he's actually alive, but, he actually arose because his body isn't there. Look, His body isn't there. By definition, they're saying he died. So if he died, are they guarding the tomb from someone coming out or from someone coming in? They said as much, verse 64, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away. They're not worried about anybody coming out. They're worried about someone coming in. Okay. Name the three groups that testified and witnessed that Jesus actually died. Okay. I heard disciples. Okay. Yeah, okay, more than three, fine. So the centurion witnessed, the disciples, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, Pilate. Pilate acknowledged, right? You do what you need to do. I'm done with this part, basically is what he was saying. Joseph of Arimathea. Why put a live person in a tomb? Okay, some observations as we wrap up here. So question, and we probably have time for a discussion. Did Joseph of Arimathea take a risk making this request? What do we know about him? Okay, verse 57. He's a rich man who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. Daniel, do you have more?
This is an interesting question. We just did Mark in one of our meetup studies that we do virtually, and one of our students that has joined us, we got to this part in Mark about Joseph of Arimathea, and she said, well, now he comes out and, and buries Jesus. Where were you beforehand? Where were you when the council was putting him to death? Why didn't you speak up then, And it's a good point. I mean, maybe we counting off against him to some degree for not being bolder when he had the opportunity on the council, on the Sanhedrin to speak up for Jesus. But we also put ourselves in his shoes, I think, and understand, not excusing that, but understanding that even still at this point, it's a huge risk. Maybe it should have been earlier, fine. But even at this point, he's facing great obstacles and opposition to come out in favor of Jesus and to honor him and his burial and all this. So, as is typical with humans, I guess, mixed bag, but definitely an act of courage, I think.
Jordan.
He was rich. He had his own tomb that he put Jesus in. He went there. He put a great stone, but notice he didn't stay there. The women stayed. He left specifically. So maybe there's something to that.
Yep. I think picking back up on Daniel's comment, growing up, I remember Les Hodges would always mention this in a prayer. Please forgive us of our sin, whether we a sin of commission, something we did, or a sin of omission, something we didn't do. And to me, that's exactly what I'm reading into this section right here, which is you had a lot of people. You had Peter actively denying Christ, but then you had a whole bunch of other people who are taking a back seat. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to intervene. I don't know how to get in front of Peter and say, let him go, no influence. So, and then there were everyone in the middle, right? But to your point, did those who had power to do something about it, did they actively fight to get him let go? Not recorded for us. If it happened, it just wasn't recorded for us. Okay, so I think potentially he took a risk. Like every other Christian in the first century, at that point, you are immediately ousted from Jewish society if you're a Christian, because you've forsaken, from their perspective, you've forsaken the old law. You're following this Christ. Lee.
He would have been touching a dead body, so ritual purification would have been gone for him.
Yeah,
and
during the Passover.
During Passover, and Mark's account says he was a member of the council, so I mean, he's taking a huge risk. Or not a risk, he's just deciding at that point that everyone will know.
Yep, okay. Thank you. Next question. Was Pilate emboldened after Jesus' death? And if so, how do you know? And I think we touched on this on Sunday. So I think I gave it to you. No, I didn't give it to you. Well, I gave you verses 65 and 66, but see if you can tie the connection together. He sounded a little snarky. I mean, okay, well, you have a guard, you go your way, you make it as secure as you know how. Okay. In other words, it's just not my problem anymore. I was worried about a riot. I'm not worried about a riot. Jesus is dead. No riot.
And we don't have the answer, so I hate bringing it up, but you wonder if he saw the deceit amongst these leaders to where he's like, I'm not going to put my guards there, and you're going to blame me, and it's just going to continue. We don't have that, and I'm sorry for bringing it up, but it just hit me. You wonder if he had that mindset.
It could have. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last question. I think we have 1 minute left. What about us? Do you believe even though you weren't there? I think we're here, so I think that's the first visible statement that we believe. A couple of observations, and I'll end. One of the most witnessed deaths of all time, and yet the Jewish leaders would not call it a miracle, or did they? And the last comment, so Acts 2:5, and then 37 through 38. Another multitude heard the message, and this is 40 days later, right on Pentecost. That multitude, was it made up of some of these Jewish leaders in verses 62 through 66? Was it made up of the witnesses around the cross? Was it made up of the multitude in in Pilate's courtyard that were being riled up by the Jewish leaders? We don't know, right? We weren't given specific names, but my guess is it could be a combination of a lot of different things, especially, and you read about that a lot, right? We read about the multitude accompanying Jesus from the Praetorium to the cross. So I thought that was really interesting how that word multitude kept coming up, and it seemed to be referring to different groups, or it could be a combination of a bunch of groups. So not a thrilling end to Matthew 27, but the homework for the last class. So looking forward to Daniel on Sunday. We're going to be reading about the resurrection, the appearing, and the ascension, and Daniel has a whole lot more planned out for us. So that'll be the end of class, and thank you very much for letting me teach.